So hello and welcome to West Sussex's finest international airport, Gatwick. No intro to camera today, as I was a wee bit pushed for time, so couldn't shilly-shally to film one for fear that the queues ahead of me would be painful, and, spoiler alert, they were pretty bad. I was flying that day on Vueling. I'm sorry, I'll say that again, Vueling. Or if you prefer, Vueling, from London down to Barcelona. I'll stick with Vueling. Economy class, as that's all they offer, and I was travelling with my mum to get on a cruise later that day. Vueling is developing a reputation for being one of the better, if not the best, low-cost carrier in Europe. I'd flown with them to and from Paris a couple of times before, and I'd quite liked what I'd experienced, and I very much liked the price I'd paid, so I was excited to see what the experience would be like on a 2-hour flight down to Spain. And this was the check-in queue we needed to join, even though we'd already checked in. I'll explain after my intro, so you'd better stick around.
Every flying Vueling, down to the sign man off to the right, please.
Hi, I'm Matt. I've lived in 5 countries on 4 continents. I've flown over 1.4 million miles. I've visited over 100 countries, every American state, but I'm nowhere near done. So subscribe to the channel so you can come with me on my next trip. Vueling operates from the south terminal at Gatwick and allows you to check in as soon as you've completed your booking. None of this 24 hours before takeoff nonsense. So we dutifully lodged all of the info and printed off boarding passes, so thought we just needed to drop our bags and be on our way. But for reasons that were never explained, Vueling made everyone queue up for the desk experience regardless of how much homework they'd done. We got to the terminal about 1 hour and 50 minutes before the flight, but after spending a good 45 minutes in line, we were actually pulled out of the queue to check in, as our flight by then was about an hour from departure. When we flew back from Barcelona, there was a dedicated bag drop area. As Vueling didn't have the space or the equipment to offer bag drops in Gatwick, I assume they needed to force everyone through the queue, as the restrictions around their destinations still varied widely and some documents needed to be manually checked. We were asked if we were vaccinated, as the unvaccinated still required a test to enter Spain when we travelled, although no proof of our vaccine status was sought. Our bags were tagged and taken, and we were on our way. I was suspicious when I noticed that the usual escalators up to the departure level were locked off, so instead we headed up in the lifts. And sure enough, we found that the queue for security snaked way back down the corridor past those escalators, hence the need to shut them down to minimise congestion. I'd been through Gatwick in late June and there had been no queue at all, but on this Sunday morning in mid-September, the place was heaving. I had anticipated this and had prepaid for fast-track security. As regular viewers will know from our experiences in Rome's airport, I'm keen on shortcuts when travelling with my mum, and for £5 each, this turned out to be a very smart investment. It was interesting to see that for just £6 you could buy instant access to the fast track, something I suspect most people in the main queue never realised. It's possibly the most flagrant way to queue jump I've ever come across. But it's a great option and a very shrewd strategy formed in my mind as I was waiting. I'd have been annoyed to pay £5 for fast track in June when I hadn't needed it, but if you can buy it on the spot for only £1 more, you'd only need there to be no queue 1 time in 5 to make the on-the-spot purchase the more effective strategy versus regularly buying fast track access. Another Gatwick top tip is to take the left turn after security, even if you're not heading for a lounge. This avoids the escalators down, which requires you to then snake through the duty free, plus there's usually a lot more free seating upstairs if you don't have lounge access. Indeed, there were no lounges for us today. I'll explain how I acquired the ticket a little later on, but it was not in the very limited way that qualifies you for BA lounge access. I'll explain those rules at the end of the video. But given how long check-in had taken, we didn't have to wait long before heading to the gate. Paying for lounge access for a short time at 8 in the morning isn't good value in my books. Gate 13 today, one of the closer ones, and there was another queue to get through to the gate lounge. It seemed to exist mainly to ensure all passengers knew that Vueling still requires masks on board their planes, to and from Spain at least. Masks were then given out to people who hadn't realised that Vueling was still trapped in 2021. An Airbus A320 that morning, and it looked like it was going to be pretty full. Boarding was by group, and the Vueling boarding algorithm plonked us into Group 3. We only had small bags, so weren't competing for overhead space, so we're in no hurry to squash onto the plane. Group 1 was called, but I don't recall any other announcements, and there was no enforcement. But we enjoyed the legroom in the gate area for as long as possible, and eventually shuffled our way down to the boarding gate. We should probably have stayed seated for longer, actually. Low-cost carriers do as little as possible that costs money, and Vueling does distinguish itself by offering boarding this way. Ryanair saves money by requiring you to exit the terminal building, walk across the tarmac, and if you're seated in the front half of the plane, climb up a ladder to get on board. Finally onto the plane, and we'd selected row 5, which was the first one that hadn't required an extra payment, and so was the first to have yellow antimacassars. 29 inches of legroom, which is pretty tight, tolerable on this 2-hour flight, but as I'm 6'4", I'd start to fidget quite seriously on much longer routes. A fairly small table and instructions on how to access the Wi-Fi, which wasn't actually working on this flight or on the flight back to London, so I can't report on how much it costs. Also, USB power at your seat, another value-added offering which distinguishes Vueling. Lights and air vents, the latter of which is perhaps unusual for a low-cost carrier, as even BA doesn't install them these days. You definitely get more than you might expect in and around your seat. The 4 rows in front of us were sold as extra space seats, offering up to 20% more legroom. That would equate to perhaps 34 inches, although only the very first row and the emergency exit rows behind us probably get quite that much space. So as we taxi and take off, let me talk about how I acquired the seat. We booked a cruise with Norwegian Cruise Lines. Check out my Matt's Oceans channel if you like cruising, as that's where my coverage of that cruise will feature. Norwegian was offering a £250 credit against airfares if you packaged flights in with the purchase of the cruise. These flights priced up at £255, which was quite a lot less than they were pricing up for on the Vueling website when I was looking to book all of this. So we were able to add flights and transfers to and from the port from Barcelona Airport for around £5. I earned 1,738 avios for the flights too, so if you value them at 0.8 of a p each, and remember that a taxi from the airport to the port costs around €40 each way in Barcelona, I actually made a very healthy profit by adding flights to my cruise booking. By booking this way though, I didn't see precisely what package I was getting, although as I got hold and cabin baggage included within my fare, plus the ability to choose seats in row 5 for no extra charge, it was several steps up from the basic offering. I was very, very happy with this booking, even if the legroom was pretty poor. And a few words about Vueling itself, but first.
Warning, the following sequence contains an image British Airways customers may find upsetting. Viewer discretion is advised.
Vueling is part of the IAG group, which owns Iberia and British Airways. It's the low-cost, short-haul little brother of the group. For 6 years, it was run by Alex Cruz, who later ran BA with questionable success, overlaying Vueling's low-cost strategies on top of BA's far more complex operations did not prove to be a raging success, it has to be said. Vueling is now Spain's largest airline and has quite an impressive network, including some quite interesting destinations such as Dakar and Amman. I really wish airlines would publish route maps. As is normal on low-cost carriers these days, no in-flight service was included, although you can get a free glass of water if you are in physical distress. The F&B items available to buy looked decent enough and seemed reasonably priced, although we'd brought some snacks to sustain us, pocket meat, if you follow the teachings of Guru Bob Mortimer. I'll pop a link to how to decode that in the description. Well worth 6 minutes and 14 seconds of your time if you haven't seen it. The challenge with a video about a low-cost carrier is that there's really not much to say about the flight itself. We didn't crash, and I got some cracking views of the Pyrenees as we closed in on Barcelona, but apart from that, there's really not much to report. I didn't feel the need to inconvenience my seatmates to visit the loos, but we all know what an airplane loo looks like. And about 2 hours after leaving Gatwick, we descended into Barcelona. We did get some good views of the 5 cruise ships visiting Barcelona that day. Ours was to be the Norwegian Epic, Virgin's Valiant Lady, the MSC Bellissima, the Seabourn Sojourn, and Royal Caribbean's Wonder of the Seas, which is currently the heaviest cruise ship afloat, so is considered to be the largest, even if it's actually 4 inches shorter than the Harmony of the Seas. If that's even remotely interesting to you, I'll invite you again to check out Matt's Oceans. And we landed. Another legacy from the dark days of 2021 was that Vueling enforced a throttled disembarkation process with 5 rows released at a time. But being in row 5, we were off in the first group into the terminal. A fair hike to passport control, although there was only a very short wait when we got there. Then our vaccine status was checked, sort of. Once again, I waved printouts of our NHS vaccine records in the vague direction of the checkpoint, and again they weren't inspected and we were just waved through. Bags were delivered about 15 minutes later and we were then off to find the bus to the boat.
Strange.
So conclusions. Vueling is a budget airline, so if you expect absolutely nothing, you'll be pleasantly surprised. You'll get Wi-Fi, assuming it works, power and air vents on a relatively new plane. You'll also get a handful of avios and you may even board directly from the gate. You won't get bounteous legroom, lounges in most cases, and free food and drink, but you don't get those on some full-service airlines these days. And given the range of Vueling's network, I think they are well worth a look. And finally, the dullest bit, which I've saved until last. You can access the BA lounge in Gatwick if you're flying on Vueling, if you buy the flight through BA, so get a BA flight number and a ticket number that starts with 125. You'll need to be gold. Silver status isn't good enough, and if you do get in, you won't be able to take in any guests. But if you do qualify, it is quite nice to be able to get some lounge time before flying on a very competitive carrier. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Please give this video a like if you did, please subscribe if you're new, and leave me a comment if you've flown on Vueling. Would you? And if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, I have a Patreon account, the link to which is in the description below. So thanks again for watching and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.